All right, well, we're officially recording. Welcome and once again to Go for the Gold. This is Steps to a Successful ESY. My name is Cheryl, and I'm part of the ESE Behavior team.
And I'm Lauren, and also part of the ESE Behavior team, and we are excited to be spending some time with you all this morning. Good to see some familiar faces.
Yes.
We saw some of you in our earlier training. We are recording this training, so it will be posted, and all of the slides will also be posted in the Google Classroom later this morning.
How exciting, in case you hear something you just have to hear again, right? I love that. All right.
So we went with the Olympic theme because the Summer Olympics are coming up. So we are going for the gold, and we're going to take a quick minute just to do a welcoming ritual. So you can either unmute or put in the chat box. We want to know where you're working for ESY, what you are teaching. If you know, I know some of you are still waiting on your assignments, but if you know what age or population you'll be working with, and then tell us your favorite Olympic event. We already got Golden Grove in the house.
All right, we love Golden Grove. Beautiful little school, Forest Hill. Okay, ASD grades 2, 3, and 4. Thank you, Stephanie. Anybody else?
And tell us your favorite Olympic
event.
event.
Oh, and by the way, when I said ice skating, people laughed at me because it's Summer Olympics, but it's still my favorite. But I guess for Summer Olympics, swimming.
Kevin, I'm going to go with FHES means Forest Hill Elementary.
Yes, it does mean Forest Hill Elementary.
And that means you'll be with Stephanie, so you guys can become friends. Say, hey, I saw you in training.
Oh, you guys can make new connections. I love that. We got to remember, the same way we work within our classroom as a village, we got to have a village of educators that support us as well. So make sure you connect.
There it is.
Basketball, track and field. Okay, was everybody Googling?
What are summer Olympic events?
All right, so Francis says Palm Springs, VE, 4th grade. How exciting. Swimming, diving, dash, hammer throw.
Decathlon. That's a lot of different sports
wow.
that I did not know were in Summer Olympics. So my personal favorite Summer Olympics is trampoline, which is another one that doesn't get a lot of TV time. But look it up. I promise you, if you're a fan of gymnastics, which I am, this is like a sidebar of that, and they're on a giant trampoline and do like a million flips. It's really fun to watch.
All right. Well, thank you guys for participating. So we're here today getting in that Olympic mindset. Gymnastics routine, says Kevin. Yeah, there's some beautiful things that happen there. Well, thank you for that. So what is the Olympic or our ESY dream, right? Our goals for today. I'm sure that people work really, really hard to get to that level. I am not one of those people. I was more into music as I was growing up, more than sports, but it is pretty amazing to see the work that they do. And we are confident that if you follow some of these steps, it's going to be pretty amazing for you to reflect back on your ESY, because you're going to be going for the gold the whole time. So training, we're going to be talking about getting to know your students, and the Olympic trials, right? That classroom structure, right? They don't just show up and have all the skills. They got to do some training. They got to do some structuring around their schedules to be able to be that good, right? We're going to call it At the Games. We're going to be talking about preparation. And then we're not going to forget to collect our awards, because we're going to be really focused on data collection today as well.
All right, so let's jump right in. So the training, you have to do that work ahead of time to ensure success. And you guys are super lucky. I think this is the first year that you have as much planning time as you do for ESY. And we think it's so valuable. We hope that you find this time valuable and really use this time wisely. Take the time to do the planning ahead of time. Read those IEPs. We're going to talk about all of the things that you can be using today and tomorrow for. So first and foremost, getting to know your students. We please want you to read their IEPs. This is how you're going to get to know your kiddos. It's going to contain the goals, the accommodations, everything important that you need to know about your students. Another really good way to use your time is to contact those caregivers. Ask some questions. We'll talk to you about what important information you really want to ask. And then pairing. When you start on Monday with your students in your classroom, focus on building those positive working relationships. If you put the time and the work in to do these things, you're going to know what you need to focus on this summer. You're going to have some ideas of what can be reinforcing for your students. And honestly, guys, the last bullet point is, for us, the most important. You're going to have students who want to work with you and they enjoy coming to ESY.
Absolutely.
And that's going to make your job easier. And it's summer. We want smooth sailing. We want this to be successful for you.
Absolutely. So during these planning days, read the IEPs. The whole reason we have extended school year is to focus on IEP goals, right? IEP goals that are emerging, IEP goals that are almost to mastery, whatever that student is at. But when you read the IEPs and you review the IEPs, we want you to really, really, really focus on, is there any additional information attached? And we want you to note a few things. Number one, any medical needs. Like, is this a student that may have seizure disorder? Or is this a student that has a different kind of medical condition, like allergies, for example? We want you to notice and note their strengths. What are they good at? That will help you to know kind of maybe how you might want to group them, etc. Note the goals that should be addressed. I know, many of you know, some students have 15 goals, some students have 5 goals. Right. It depends, that's so individual. But each IEP team met and discussed how many or which goals should be followed through on and should be focused on for ESY. And yes, for some kids, it is all of their goals. And I know that that is a lot. However, that is what that IEP team told us that we need to do. So that should be your focus. And then, very important, we are the ESC behavior team.
This is our bread and butter.
Is there a functional behavior assessment or FBA? And is there a behavior intervention plan or BIP? And if so, please use them, review them, and use them, right? So what we created for you, you do not have to use this. This is not a mandatory form. Nobody's going to be looking for it, but it will help you to organize your thoughts. We created a fill out my ESY class at a glance form. It's like a little template that can help you fill out as you review things to kind of make sure you have them noted. It's a really nice resource, and I think I would definitely use it if I had my own classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. A great one-stop shop to kind of have, okay, are there any of those medical needs? Does the kid have a plan? Also great to share if you have any support staff coming into your classroom, whether that's a paraprofessional, an SLP, occupational therapist, any of those things can be noted on the form, but also that form can be shared with them so that they know about your students. And if you were to be out one day or anything like that, you've got all of that information in one place. So reaching out to caregivers, we talked about this is important. So first and foremost, take a minute to introduce yourself, right? Cheryl said that this is like a mini school year, so you've got a little bit of time. Take that moment, introduce yourself to the caregivers, let them know that you're going to be their child's teacher for extended school year. Then ask some of those important questions. Questions like, what is your student like? What are their strengths and weaknesses, right? Good information that your student may or may not be able to share with you, right? We know that during extended school year, you could be working with a variety of populations, and you may have students who have verbal skills and are able to answer those questions for you, or you may have students who are pre-verbal or non-speaking that aren't able to answer those questions for you. So having these conversations with the caregivers can be very important. Arrival and dismissal, another huge one. Know how they're getting to school every morning, know how they're leaving in the afternoon, and then ask that question, is there any other important information that you would like me to know about your student as I spend the next couple of weeks with them? There's 2 resources here. You can see screenshots of them up above. The first is the Getting to Know Your Student form. That can be sent home, but that's also something that can be done while you're having those caregiver conversations. So while you're on the phone, ask those questions, and then you've got all the information in one place. But maybe a caregiver didn't have time to answer your call, or maybe you weren't able to get them. You can send this form home. They can fill it out and send it back. There's also a resource there for you, an ESY daily home note. Yes. It's important to communicate with your caregivers every day. Let them know how their student's day was. This is by no means required. This was made as something simple and easy for you to use to do that communication, but it's absolutely not required. You're welcome to download a copy of it and make changes to make it fit your classroom needs. Carlene, yes, this form is in the Google Classroom. All of these resources, anything that we talk about today is within that social skills and behavior support section of the Google Classroom.
And part of the reason I just want to loop this back into when we said read the IEPs, please, 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 IEP, IEP, IEP. For some students, you're very welcome, Carlene. For some students on their individual education plan, it says daily communication with family. So if you have one of those IEPs, we want to make sure that in serving that student, we gave you that resource if you were to need it. So the first day's coming up. It's so exciting. Your number one job, aside from safety, is of course to begin to develop what we refer to as instructional control. Okay, this is key in all situations, and believe me, I have the expert right here sitting next to me, so she is going to talk about it some more. But it's important to establish that instructional control, meaning, they understand that you are the giver of good things. They give you good things, you give them good things. But this is especially important in ESY because it's like a little mini school year within the summer, okay? Instructional control means a few things. Number one, a positive working relationship. I think we can all say it makes it much better when we have a positive working relationship with our students. Number two, we want the learners to respond consistently to our demands. I know it says the word demand, but that could be direction, that could be instruction, that can be phrased in a variety of different ways. And here's the best part of establishing instructional control. All of us went to school to be what? That's right. Teachers, right? We want to teach. And even if you didn't go to school to be a teacher, the reality is you want to be a teacher now, which we say, welcome, we love all, okay? But here it is. If you establish instructional control, you get to teach more. So here's how you do that.
All right, so you want to start, like we said, on the first day. Just spend a little bit of time. Please don't feel like this needs to be done all day long for the first 5 days of 4 days, because there's no Fridays.
That's
4
right.
days of ESY, but we do want you to engage in pairing with your students. So this is how you build that instructional control, and it's the process of building relationships so that you become the reinforcer for your student. They want to come and work with you. They want to be near you and spend time with you. So these are the steps for pairing. We have the steps written out twice just because they look a little bit different for our younger students versus our older students. You're going to notice really the biggest difference here is step one. For our younger students, it's going to be play. And for our older students, it's going to be hang out, right? And either word you use, depending on what population you're working with, the most important thing is that you're following the student's lead, okay? So you're talking about things that they like, you're watching them or engaging with them in some kind of play or conversation. The most important thing is that we're not placing demands in this time and that we're not asking questions. And please understand that that's natural. The first time you meet a student, you want to say, hey, what's your name? Where do you go to school during this school year? What are you going to do this summer? What are you doing with your family, right? Like, that's natural. We want to ask them questions. But for some of your kiddos, that's going to sound like demand, 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 demand. And that might be an immediate shutdown, like, oh my goodness, this person is asking me so many questions. So we want to take it slow. Make some comments on what they're doing, kind of engage yourself with them. And then once they start to let you in, whether that's orienting their body to you, whether that's engaging with you, then you can start to ask some of those simple questions. Maybe ask them to help you do something, maybe ask them to hand you things. Then you can start with those academic demands. Now, important to note, some of your students, this is going to happen with easily. It's going to happen quickly. Some of your students, it's going to take a little bit longer. Pairing may take longer with some students if they're not excited about being at ESY because they know that their brother and their cousin are at the pool right now and they're here with you, right? And that's okay. We want to still make ESY fun. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but you might have to put in a little bit of extra work. So spend that extra time. Some of your students are going to love you just because
you're you.
You're their teacher and you're awesome. And some of them are going to need a little bit more. When you're engaging in this process, don't forget about reinforcement. Use that specific social praise. So tell them exactly what they're doing that you like. I love the way that you are letting me play the game with you. Thank you for coming to my table and sitting down, right? Now, a very important point down there at the bottom, a student needs to effectively pair with all staff members, not just the teacher. So if you do have a paraprofessional in your classroom, have conversations with them about this. This is important. If you have speech pathologists, occupational therapists, any other family counselor, any other kind of service provider coming into your classroom, they also need to engage in this process so that they're paired with all staff members working with them throughout the summer.
Absolutely. And you know what the best part of the whole concept of instructional control is? You get to have a little bit of fun with the kids. And I think that we sometimes forget fun.
Absolutely.
We're so focused, we forget the fun. So even if it's 5 minutes, don't leave here and say those ladies from the behavior team said, I get to play or hang out all day. That is not what we said. We're saying take those little opportunities to do so. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is something I need to wash over you and remind you of is some of our students, yes, consistent. We would love this to be consistent, absolutely, and to always be doing it. So some of our students have language processing issues. So it's not so much coming from the behavioral side of the house, but also in terms of understanding that they process language differently. So if you're asking too many questions, right, one right after the other, could also be off-putting to them.
Yeah.
Because of that, it becomes overwhelming. So just keep these kind of strategies in mind because they can be good for all students. So guidelines for instructional control, be consistent and be predictable, right? Have a way you're gonna respond, even if you are giving that redirection, right? We wanna keep that in mind. This is so important. We sometimes think we are being super clear. We had that, Lauren and I wrote an email and we had that happen to us this week. We thought it was very clear. Apparently, it was not so clear. So provide clear instructions. Make sure that you focus on providing statements instead of questions. So let's talk about this just briefly. So you want a student to get to work, right? It's time to work. I said that just as nicely as I could. It's time to work. It's time to do math. Sure. It's time to engage in reading. What we sometimes do is we ask a question. Don't tell on yourselves, but I know we've all done it. Are you ready to work?
No.
Guess what? That's now a closed conversation that could potentially escalate. So don't ask a question when you actually have a statement that you're trying to say. I know we're all nice people, we're educators, but please be very clear in what you're saying. Please focus on using consistent and simple language at first, okay? And a lot of us have this wonderful vocabulary, but we need to know our audience, right? Do our students understand what we are saying? So simple and consistent language. Also, for some of our students, we need to really be very, very focused on changing our tone of voice and potentially our facial expressions. When students do what is correct versus what is incorrect, or what is expected versus unexpected, depending on the language that you use. I just want to be very clear here. Changing your tone of voice and changing your facial expressions are very different than changing your volume. There's a time as educators that we have to raise our voice, meaning our volume has to go louder because we might be in a bigger environment where the child is in danger. But changing our tone and changing our volume are two different things. Also, please follow through. If you say you're going to earn 5 minutes of recess more than you had yesterday, then make sure that you give them those extra 5 minutes. It could be a positive thing or it could be more of a different kind of consequence. But no matter what, please follow through.
Absolutely.
Also, provide feedback frequently and be specific in your feedback. A lot of us say, good job, great job. Oh my gosh, that was awesome. What was awesome? It was awesome that you turned in all your work today. It was awesome that you went and followed the traffic pattern in the classroom. Whatever it is that you're focusing on, be specific.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to pause for just a second to give you that attendance link. We know that some of you have been waiting for that. So there is the QR code. I will put the link in the chat box in just a second. Please make sure you select ESE first.
Yes.
And then it's okay. We know that it says that it was yesterday's date. Just go ahead and put the title of this session, which is Go for the Gold. And we will make sure we have a copy of the attendance that will be sent to us via the Google Meets that we can prove what time you logged in, what time you logged out, and we will be sharing that with site administrators as well. Give everybody just another minute or two to do that.
This is the only time that this is going to be up, so please make sure that you are doing the attendance link at this time.
Yep, we're going to be just another minute. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward. I'll post the link one more time in the chat box. So if you weren't able to get the QR code to work, you do have the link in the chat box. All right. So Olympic trials. Now, this is ESY Go for the Gold, Francis. Oh, and you can mark session 2. That's fine. The session number doesn't matter. You can say session 2.
I just want to make sure you have the title up there, Francis.
All right, so we're at the Olympic trials. We need some structure and setup to make the team. So we need to think about our physical structure. You guys should be in your classrooms today. So at least now you know what furniture you have to work with. So think about that and think about how you're going to set that up. You also want to think about your daily schedule. Some of you will be provided a daily schedule by your site administrators. Please follow that. This is if you are not provided a daily schedule, we have some ideas, some tips, some things you might want to consider. We also want you to consider your behavioral structure of your classroom, what your classroom management plan is going to look like for the summer. Why do we want to think about these things? This is going to help organize your environment. It will make it predictable for your students. You're going to incorporate routines, and that's going to make it familiar with them so that they become comfortable. We want to be that safe, comfortable place for your students to come day in and day out during the summer. It focuses on the development of independence if you have those routines and structures in place. And it's also proactive when we talk about the behavior side of things so that you have less behaviors that you're having to deal with.
So this is just one example of what the classroom layout could look like. This does not have to look like this. This does not mean that you want to make it look like this. It's just one example. So you have an individual group or individual space for students to work. You have a whole group area. You have a teacher table. If you know you're going to be having staff, related service staff or direct service staff, depending, pushing in, that you have a space for them. And then you may also want to have some centers. So this is just one classroom layout.
Here's another example of classroom layout. This one has a cool down area, maybe something to consider. Some of your students may have access to a cool down area written in their IEPs, so something to consider. You also see here in this setup, there's student desks, and notice that there's an empty desk in between every student. So if you have students that have on their IEP seat away from distraction, this could be a good way to set up your classroom. Now, we understand some of you are going to have tables, some of you are going to have desks. Your setup is really going to depend on the furniture that you have. We just want you to really get thinking about, where are my students going to go when it's time to work on IEP goals? Where are my students going to go when I want them to work independently? Where, like Cheryl said, are those service providers that are coming into my classroom going to have a space to work with our students? So just things for you to consider as you work on setting up your classroom.
So daily schedules, we encourage you to have a daily schedule. We know those folks that are going to the Olympics, they have a daily schedule, right?
Sure.
They know what's up. So we want you to note that the daily schedule should promote that continuous engagement. Then you'll probably have less behavior problems. Remember, kids aren't just going to sit there and do nothing. They're going to find something to do, and it's typically not what we want them to do. So for each subject area, we want to have the concept of whole group rotations and a brain break. We may, of course, want to make sure that we support our support staff. We want to support our support staff, but that we want to include our support staff in our schedules rather than just having them free to support. Please understand, everybody's personality is different. If we're not sure what to do, we may not really know where we should be, how we should be seated, who should we be working with. So it's really important to include them. As a reminder, this daily schedule talks about whole group rotations and brain break. Those rotations, that's the meat and potatoes, right, of ESY, because that's when you're going to be focused on those IEP goals.
Absolutely. All right, so here's an example that's sample schedule. Remember, we said this is absolutely not set in stone. You're welcome to download a copy of this and make changes. This was just to give you an idea of where you might want to consider putting different activities throughout your day. Notice that notice that the whole group times listed on here are short. You're going to need to know your students and know what their attention level may be, but we're recommending no more than 10 or 15 minutes in whole group, because really the majority of your time should be spent in those small group rotations working on their IEP goals. Notice here down at the bottom, there's a brain break listed. It is our understanding that elementary schools will have fine arts this summer.
Yes.
So if they are doing fine arts, you could schedule it there during that time, obviously.
And move that around.
Move it around, working with your school and what time you have access to that fine arts staff. But these are just things for you to work on, that time for SLL or those social skills, think about when you can add that in there. You're going to have students who may have social emotional goals on their IEP. This would be a really good time to work on those things. So this again is posted in the Google Classroom as an example, some ideas for you to think about.
So classroom management, this is really, really important. More proactive than reactive strategies. We know that there are times that we will have to be reactive. We understand, but be proactive. Make sure that you keep an increased positive interactions ratio, right? So for every redirection, let this wash over you for a second. For every redirection that we give a student, we're supposed to have 4 positive interactions with them. So the more positive you are, the more that ratio will balance itself out, okay? We also want you to increase the overall interactions, especially with the students that are a little bit more difficult or might seem difficult for you, all right? This includes verbal interactions, nonverbal interactions, and of course, proximity. Some kids do better if we're a little closer to them, and some kids do better when we're a little bit further out. And please, pretty please, with the cherry on top, look at that last action point. We are needing to respond immediately to positive and negative behaviors. There's something that happens to us when we become educators, right, Lauren? It's like we know everybody that's doing all the wrong things.
Your radar.
Yeah, we're like, you are not listening and you have your phone out. I mean, we're awesome at it, but we also need to be just as awesome as pointing out when the ones that are on task are on task. So that's a little bit on classroom management. It'll be good for all. Here we have, this is in the Google Classroom under the social skills and behavior support tab. It is a classroom management plan idea sheet. If you are not sure what your rules are, what you want them to be, what your classroom procedures are, we encourage you. This is not something I'm going to ask for or we're going to ask for. It's just something that would really help you sketch out those ideas in that new environment, especially if you are not in a classroom that is yours throughout the year. It also includes staff roles and responsibilities. If you do nothing else, reflect on those so that if you do have staff in your classroom, how can they support you and how can you support them?
These are just good things to think about, guys. And like Cheryl said, nobody's coming looking for this, but it's a place for you to have those conversations with your other staff members and with your students. Remember that your students are coming from all different classrooms, and maybe in one classroom, I could get up and go to the bathroom whenever I wanted. And in this classroom, I show this signal, and in this classroom, there was a different expectation. So just making sure, just like you do at the beginning of the school year, that at the beginning of the ESY, you're taking those couple of minutes to tell them what they need to do when they need to ask for help. How do they go to the bathroom? Where do we line up? What does that look like? And if you take the time to think about it ahead of time, you'll be prepared and ready to teach those things.
It almost becomes like a little bit of a to-do list, right?
Absolutely.
That's how we do it. So at the games, let's be ready for a great event every day. So we want to prepare by having our instructional materials. Please remember, we're going to explore those vetted materials, things that are appropriate, things that have been reviewed for us and have been approved. Grouping students, we need to think about how we're going to do that. We can group them in different ways. We must have a plan for backup activities. What do I do when I'm done? Because I know a lot of us don't want to hear done, 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 done. And then they get to doing something they shouldn't be doing, right? And lesson plans, you're welcome to use the template that we provide as well. So what are the benefits? You have what you need and are ready for the day. The day goes by quicker and smoothly. And most importantly, it reduces downtime and potential problem behaviors.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about each of those. So the instructional materials, here's a little menu of what you have available for you for instruction. Take the time to explore those resources. So there are themed resources within the Google Classroom under the Access Points folder that I believe the theme this year is Around the World in 22 Days. So there are themed resources there for you. There's all kinds of activities, supplements for your curriculum, and everything in there has already been vetted. You also have access to iReady via the student computer, as well as Sabbath Success Maker. iReady Toolbox, there were trainings available yesterday. I'm not positive, you'll have to go back and look on the list for today whether there's support or office hours, but iReady Toolbox also has lots of information and resources available to teachers. And then guys, don't forget about Blender. Blender's there for you all year round. Blender still continues to be available for you throughout the summer. So these are all materials that have already been vetted, already available to you. Please, please make sure you're using those vetted materials, or core adopted materials only. This includes videos. Stephanie, it is our understanding that students should have access to computers, but I do not have the answer as to whether those are being provided by the sites or whether they're supposed to be coming with them. That would be a question for your site administrator.
I agree. So grouping students, use that IEP information, present level, similar goals to help you create at least initial groups. Consider all of your support staff and service providers that are in the classroom. That way you can collaborate as well on the grouping. For example, let's say I start day 1, day 2. On day 3, the para says, Cheryl, this one little group isn't working. There's 2 kids that just aren't getting along. We want to have those conversations, and then we want to go ahead and maybe make some flexible groups, right? We need the kids to understand that these groups can change at any moment. So that's that last action point. We know you may not know some of this information, behavioral factors, personality factors. However, as you observe it, as long as you establish that it's going to be flexible grouping, you should be so good to go with the groupings. And here are some, I think, examples on some ways that we can group. So we can do like 3, students that are reading 3 or more years below grade level, students that might be reading 2 or more years below grade level, 1 or 1 year below grade level. And why am I saying this? This is just one way to help you organize the information. For math, you may group them based on where they are with addition and subtraction facts. You may group them. There's a lot of different ways to group them, okay? But with reading, the importance of this is some kids might need the phonics, phonemic awareness, and that's what their goals are attached to more than maybe the comprehension. Although comprehension, I know, is good for all.
Absolutely. And all of this is information you're going to find within their individual education plans. And like Cheryl said, the groups don't have to be static. So as you get to know your kids and as you find out how they're performing, you can always make changes. So backup activities, we think this is so important because we want to avoid any and all downtime in the classroom, okay? Downtime in your classroom, students are going to find a way to fill their time. And a lot of times you are not going to like what they choose to do to fill their time with, okay? So our recommendations have a menu of options for students. These are things you can do when you finish what is already done. It's up to you what those activities are. Our recommendations are things like puzzles, coloring sheets. Maybe you have some file folder activities, some mindfulness activities or word searches that have to do with the topics you're discussing. You can also do interactive games like World Book. In our live training yesterday, someone recommended Look It. They said that's something vetted through the district that has lots of great resources, so something else to consider. And then also do fun things, right? This is summer, it is ESY, so keep them engaged. Think about the student interest and what ways you can build off of that student interest, and then also go into those supplemental resources within the access points section. There's cooking activities, there's arts and crafts activities, other ways that you can build off of those daily themes and keep your students engaged and keep those hands and minds busy.
Busy. So here's a little bit about lesson planning. You can see this is just a very short form, and we don't know what your site administrator is going to ask of you. We do not know if they're going to be collecting lesson plans or not. This is just how to organize your own thoughts so that you are prepared with your copies ready to go on day 1. So simple lesson plan template. That's all that it is. Please look at it. It talks about whole group. It also has some rotations there listed for you. And this is also a resource already available for you on the Google Classroom.
All right, so now we are collecting our awards. It's time to take that data and let the data speak to the success that your students have had during ESY. So when should you collect data? Our thought is each time you work on those IEP goals. If you do it, write it down, okay? If you don't write it down, it didn't happen. So we want to make sure we're consistent with that data collection and prepare ahead of time to make your data collection easier and more consistent. So the benefits of data collection, first and foremost, you're doing the job you were hired to do, right? Your goal during extended school year is to work on those IEP goals. You can also report on student progress, and this is going to assist next year's teacher in knowing where to pick up where you left off. So when do I collect data? I can collect during small groups. I can collect it when I'm working one-on-one with students and when I'm addressing specific skills. You may need to get creative. We talked a little bit before about maybe your student has social emotional goals or independent functioning goals. You may not be able to collect data on that during your math small group. So you may need to think about during the SLL time, maybe it's during a transition time because your student has an independent functioning goal about transitions, right? So this is why we're saying take that time, look at the IEPs ahead of time so you know what goals you need to collect. You may not be able to collect goals data for every student for every goal every day. Our rule of thumb is that at least 2 to 3 data points for every student's goals every week, okay? So plan ahead. If you have these systems in place, maybe on Mondays and Wednesdays, you collect data for group A. Maybe on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you collect data for group B. You can rotate when you collect data, but make sure you're collecting data on those IEP goals.
So some of our tips is keep it simple. Use a simple data sheet. There's a calendar data sheet that will be in the ESY Google Classroom that can be very, very, very helpful. Remember, you're only going to be collecting data on those goals identified for ESY. We're binder people, so we are recommending you create a binder, but you might be more of a folder person or a basket person, whatever works for you, or a clipboard person. Oh, I do like a clipboard, right? So whatever kind of person you are, we just want to make sure by saying this, create a binder or create a space for it, is that you don't forget to do it because it is right there, right? You've set up a system to make sure you're collecting that data. You'll have everything in one place for that easy access. So every time you sit with the student to work on a goal, document how they performed, all right? And here's the thing. So far this training, we've been telling you, nobody's going to be coming for this, nobody's going to be asking you for this, but
this one they will.
This is a biggie, right? The same way at the end of the Olympics, they do the whole thing with silver, gold, and bronze. This is silver, gold, and bronze for us, right? This is the whole reason that there's an extended school year, is to collect data on those IEP goals, to teach to those IEP goals so that we know if the child actually or the young person grew and mastered that goal, or if they're still emerging within that goal, or if they're much more towards mastery in that goal.
Yeah, and like Cheryl said, at the end of summer, guys, you are going to be asked to send home and give to your site administrator a summary data report at the end of the summer of how they performed on each of their goals. And if you're doing the data collection from the start of ESY, you're going to have no problem producing that data and giving those final percentages.
Here's a copy or a little bit of a, I guess I'll call it a clip of what the data collection sheet with the calendar looks like. I'll be honest with you, there's great codes there you can use. I also, when I was even in the classroom, this was a great way for me to double check my attendance too. So if the child is absent and was absent the whole day, at the end of the day, if that was a data collection day, I put absent there too. Yeah. That way everything matches, because if then somebody questions, well, how come you did not have your 2 to 3 data points this week for this child? You can say, well, this child was out the whole week. Right?
Absolutely.
So that's just very, very helpful documentation. On our team, we say if we don't write it down, did not happen.
And guys, this sheet is not required, but data collection is required. And our thought is work smarter, not harder. There's already a sheet that they made for you. Might as well use it. But if you have your systems in place that you like to use your school year, use your data collection sheets. Just be prepared to report on those goal reports at the end of the summer.
And I feel it's important for us to just take a step back too and say one thing before we close up the session. Some students may come to you with their data sheets already.
Absolutely.
Some students, their teacher has sent you everything. The behavior collection data sheet, the academic collection data. If that is the case, please use what you have been provided. But it's really important. No, this form is not in Liquid Office. This form is in the Google Classroom. And if you look at the slide right here in front of you, it tells you it's the Google Classroom. And most of the stuff we're talking about today is under social skills and behavior support. I think that's in the general Google Classroom.
Yep, so stick to that Google Classroom. Use vetted materials. They're asking us to remind you. Just make sure that everything you're using that's student-facing is either coming from the ESY Google Classroom or coming from Blender, because that's where all of your vetted materials are going to be. Everything that we talked about today, all of the samples and worksheets and lesson plans and schedules we showed you are available in that Google Classroom. Here is the Google Classroom code. If you do not already have access You should all already have access to this, but here it is one more time as a reminder, just in case. I'll give you just a second to write that down, take a picture, do whatever you need to do. All right, there is a Google support form also in the Google Classroom towards the top of the feed. If you have site administrator specific questions, things like who's in my class, what's my schedule, what materials do I have access to, or anything about timesheet and payroll, all of that stuff is for your site administrator. If you have questions outside of that are ESE specific, whether it relates to behavior, access points, accessing EdPlan, anything ESE specific, please fill out this ESY Google support form and the appropriate team will get back to you as soon as we can to get you that information. These are our email addresses. If you were to need them at any point throughout the summer, please reach out to us or email your supporting behavior resource teacher. There will be behavior resource teachers as well as BHPs from our teams supporting throughout the school year. If you do not have any further questions, you guys are free to log out. We are going to head and stop the recording and we will hang out here to answer any questions.
And thank